Bene, direi che possiamo iniziare. Thank you to Professor John Goddard, who's our speaker today. But before giving him the floor, so to speak, even though we are online here, I will very briefly say a few words in Italian on this initiative of this webinar series. Buongiorno a tutti i partecipanti, grazie per essere qui. Diamo inizio con questo primo webinar alla serie che stiamo organizzando su università e aree metropolitane. E da che cosa nasce l'idea di questa serie? Dal fatto che nella nostra area, nell'area milanese, il sistema universitario è sempre più rilevante in termini quantitativi e qualitativi, è una cosa che noi sappiamo da alcuni anni, ma che sempre di più diventa evidente. E quindi sempre di più ci si chiede quale impatto ha un sistema che ormai conta così tanti studenti e docenti e persone che ruotano intorno al sistema universitario sulla città in cui è insediato. E dall'altro punto di vista, dal punto di vista opposto, come l'evoluzione della città in cui è insediato, in questo caso Milano, come impatta sullo sviluppo del suo sistema universitario. Qui naturalmente il termine impatto si riferisce a diversi tipi di impatto, l'impatto economico, l'impatto urbanistico, l'impatto culturale, e però sappiamo che c'è una riflessione da alcuni anni in corso su questo rapporto università-città, ma ci sono diversi tipi di città e diversi tipi di università, ovviamente, che condizionano profondamente il rapporto. Ci sono città universitarie che sono nate proprio o comunque si sono sviluppate come città universitarie. Pensiamo in Italia a città come Pavia o Urbino, ma anche Pisa o Padova, che hanno un rapporto, direi, simbiotico con l'università, che svolge un ruolo dominante nel tessuto urbano. E qui questo, come vedremo, è anche un terreno particolarmente fertile per quel modello di civic university di cui oggi John Goddard ci parlerà. Ci sono poi invece aree metropolitane a economia tradizionale, in Italia possiamo pensare a Roma, Napoli, eccetera, che hanno un rapporto più complesso, difficile, a volte distante, anche un po' di separazione con le loro università, che spesso vivono un po' come realtà separate, come torri d'avorio che non sono mai state pienamente, non sono mai pienamente integrate con l'università. E poi ci sono aree metropolitane invece plasmate sempre di più da un'economia della conoscenza, quindi un'economia che si basa su settori high-tech e soprattutto su servizi di terziario avanzato. Pensiamo tipicamente Boston o Londra, che hanno un rapporto di complementarità fra una produzione di capitale umano ad altissima qualità e una presenza di quelli che vengono chiamati high skill clusters, cioè gruppi di presenza di alte professionalità nell'area. A quale tipo appartiene Milano? Come può svilupparsi il rapporto università-città qui? È una cosa che appunto affronteremo nei prossimi seminari, perché appunto vedremo l'impatto urbanistico, l'impatto sull'innovazione che possono avere le grandi università. Discuteremo due casi esemplari, quello di Boston e quello di Barcellona e così via. Oggi però parliamo di un tipo particolare di università, la civic university, che è un modello che si sta sempre di più discutendo e affermando, e a questo punto I turn at this point to English, because I give the floor to to Professor John Goddard. Just a few words to introduce him. John Goddard is Emeritus Professor at Newcastle University in the UK, where he founded the Center for Urban and Regional Development Studies, And subsequently he has been also Deputy Vice Chancellor with the responsibility for its city and regional engagement. John, besides his own university, the university where he has taught for so long, has been an academic leader of the OECD program Higher Education and Regions. And he has been advisor to the European Commission. So he has served and he has been a consultant, not just in the UK, but also in a much wider context. His academic publications, which are well known, reflect this experience, which has been a academic and also a policy experience. His best best known publications, I think, are The University and the City, 2013, and The Civic University, Policy and Leadership Challenges of 2016. Unless Professor Goddard has published something very recently that we are not, that I don't know of, but these are the most well-known, the best-known books. I will stop here because I think this is enough information to give to understand how important it is for us today to have John Goddard as a guest to introduce not just the topics of today, but the overall topics of our seminar series. And I thank him very much for being with us here. Thank you, John, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Just a little bit of further introduction. You have a slide. I presume everyone can see the slides now. I've chosen the title Inside Out and Outside In Perspectives because basically I started studying regional development and came across as an academic the potential role of universities as key actors in my studies. It started off with work for the European Commission on what was called mobilization of indigenous potential. How did you identify the possibility of differences between and within cities on innovation? And in the process, we bumped into universities as potential, but often realized sources of support for research and innovation. I did a lot of that stuff in my own city for many years. And then we had a new rector or new vice chancellor who said, you've studied this, you now come to do it. So I moved from being an academic to actually putting my ideas into practice as an institutional leader working with the city authorities. And we did a lot of practical things. And then when I retired in 2008, I then took what I'd learned first from theory, then into practice, and to synthesize that into two major publications. And basically what I'm going to do is tell you about how I captured the insights from doing it and linking it back to my academic work. So this is about reflections on thinking and doing. So I do the next slide, and I hope this works. So that's the outside-in perspective. This book, The Civic University, the Policy and Leadership Challenges. That's what it means. How do you do this from inside the university in terms of leadership and management? And the first book, which was the outside-in perspective, looking at the university from outside, from government, from business and the community in a number of UK cities. The Civic University book looks at a number of European universities and cities. And this is not an easy field to work in because it's classically a number of separate, possibly 2 or 3 knowledge and practice communities. I mean, my field as Professor of Regional Development is in territorial development, looking at uneven city development and all the problems that confront cities. So I sit in a world of researchers and policymakers interested in, broadly speaking, territorial development. There's a totally different world of academics and policymakers, well, perhaps two worlds. One interested in science and innovation, the whole field of technological change, research and innovation systems, and another field, a third field, which are people whose object of study is the university, and they are people who look at the university as an institution. And broadly speaking, the university world is interested in issues of scientific excellence, educational excellence. And these are two quite different worlds, and you have to walk between them if you're going to take this agenda forward. And the part of the language that I've found to link these two worlds is the whole idea of universities as urban anchor institutions. What does that mean? What is an anchor institution? Well, here's a definition. Which is a large, locally embedded institution, typically non-government. It's not part of government. It could be a cultural or other civic university, civic institution, like a hospital or like a theatre or a gallery, which is important to the economy, and this is very important, and the wider community life of the city in which it's based. And these activities generate impact and what's called in economics term externalities that can support or anchor wider economic activity in the local locality. So anchor institutions do not, like local government or municipalities, have a democratic mandate. They're not governed by voters. And their primary mission is not regeneration. So the university is not primarily responsible for local economic development. However, their scale, size of the number of people they employ, their local rootedness and their links with the community is that they can play a role in local development and economic growth, representing what's sometimes called the sticky capital. We live in a highly globalized world. How do you tie down the global in the local? And universities, by definition, are global institutions. They don't have a territorial boundary like a municipality. They are global, but they also are rooted in a place. They are institutions, and these two words are quite important. They are of the city and not just in the city. Those in and of do mean quite important different things. Is the university just in the city, or is it of the city? Is a question mark you need to ask. So moving on. And universities are archetypal anchor institutions. Their main location, compared with private businesses, is fixed. They have huge sunk investment in buildings, and the identification, the name of the city is usually in the name of the University of Milan or University of Turin. And on past experience, they're relatively immune to, unlike businesses. By and large, they don't suddenly fail. They don't dramatically reduce in size. So they're a sort of stability, particularly when the world economy, the national economy going up and down. And they are particularly important in weaker economies. Milan's a strong economy, but in weaker economies, they are more important. So my university in Newcastle is probably in the Italian equivalent, is nearer to Naples. It's in the far north of England. It's the furthest from the capital city. It's in an economy that's not very strong. So it is very important as to have a strong local institution. And what does anchoring imply for universities? Well, it implies a number of things. it implies relationships with other institutions that inhabit the place. So an anchor institution is not isolated. It is connected to other institutions, whether it's cultural institutions, local government, hospitals. It raises normative questions about the need for academic practice, both teaching and research, to be relevant to the place in which the practitioners live and work as citizens. Now, I say that because when I was Deputy Vice-Chancellor, I used to go round to my academic colleagues and say, in the university, what does it mean to you to be a citizen of Newcastle? So in other words, this notion that the academics and the professional staff are citizens. And it also implies we need to think about the development of the city and the university's role in that, about not just economic competitiveness. If we think about places, we have to think about the round. Everything is to do with the development of the city. And that's both physical, the physical imprint, the placemaking, the social and cultural dimensions of it all. So anchoring implies these really quite deeper relationships between the city and the university. And it also raises some questions about the public good of university. Interestingly enough, universities are largely publicly funded. They are ultimately accountable to the public good, but how do we demonstrate we are contributing to the public good? And I think it's quite important. This quote is from, I'll do the whole quote from a paper in Thesis 11, which you'll recognise from your marks, is a quote from a guy who was director of the London School of Economics, Craig Calhoun. In a very important paper, he says, we in the academy treat our opportunity to do research as not as public trust. That's a very important word, public trust, but for a reward for success in past studies. You get promoted on the basis of your citations and quoting the past. And rewards for researchers, we know, are deeply tied up with the production of academic hierarchy. The top institutions, Cambridge in the UK and Oxford, and we in the academy love hierarchy. We love to be the most cited person in our field. But, and this is a very important but, the public support for universities, who ultimately pay for us, is often based on the effort to educate citizens in general, to share knowledge, to distribute as widely as possible in accordance with publicly articulated purposes. So broadly speaking, we cannot any longer live in the ivory tower of the university. That's often well recognised. And this use is another important value. I mean, many of the people, I'm a social scientist, I'm a human geographer, or economic geographer. It's a very interesting paper by a guy called John Brewer. He talks about the public value of the social sciences. And this word public implies fundamental questions about accountability and about questions of who we as academic social sciences are accountable to. So public social science has both a research and teaching agenda and involves a commitment to promote the public good through civic engagement. So this is a very important point, accountability. And the other A word beginning with A in English is autonomy. We in the academy value our autonomy. Universities don't want to be told what to do by governments. So this whole idea of accountability and economy, those two words are pretty fundamental when we're talking about the civic university. So let's just talk about the university and the city. And I know you've got a future webinar on impact. This is just a diagram of the city of Newcastle. But all the point about it is the two universities in Newcastle, the University of Northumberland, this is broadly speaking the central business district here, but is the physical imprint of the two universities. huge part of the land use of the city centre is dominated by the universities. And you can begin to measure their direct economic impact. This is a bit out of date. How many people they employ, the indirect knock-on effect of employment in the city and beyond. And that's quite significant. Newcastle is quite, the city itself is quite small in terms of population. So there's and everyone goes around, and I guess you're going to do this, measuring what I call the passive economic impact. You happen to have a university in your city, and willy-nilly, whatever you do, it has an impact, an economic impact through its employment, its procurement, and all the rest of it. But, and this is a very important developed from the other university I'm associated with, Birmingham University, has created an anchor network, and it really focuses not only on the economic impact, in this case, £5 billion workforce, but collaborating areas of employment, procurement, management of land and assets, and to have a potential powerful input in shaping the city economy. So how do you use your ability as a university to buying goods and services, to working with the cultural sector? You need to bring all the actors together to make sure you maximize your impact. And an important part of the work that's been done more recently is the whole idea of just, fair anchors, which is moving beyond the academic realm. And this is a more recent paper than is in my book. It's about just anchors. Those are institutions that deliberately set out to maximize their impact in a way that's fair and works with other producers of knowledge. This is incredibly important because knowledge does not only exist in the academy. It sits out there in businesses, in citizens, in community groups, in creative artists, and so on. And so how can we, as it were, raise the visibility in the community, not only of the university, but the visibility of these other organizations which you are working with. And the whole idea of co-production of knowledge with citizens, so we can actually make this much more visible to the wider society. That's a really important and new point. So now let's move on to talk about the university as being part of the city. And there's a number of ways into this. We can think about the university as an urban innovation actor. How is the university a visible actor? And you can think about this as a shift from mode one linear knowledge, where we know it all, to where we recognize that knowledge can be co-produced in open innovations with lots of other people. And the key issue here is the university is both an educational and cultural institution and not just a knowledge producer. So we can join up the direct commodification of knowledge capital, classically universities work in spin-outs and commercialization, with human capital development, the skills in the urban labour market. And so how do we give skills to the private sector, to the public sector, and to the community and voluntary sector? But also build what is called social capital, based on trust and cooperative norms in local governance networks. So we have to think about the developmental as well as the generative. It's not just what the university pushes out into the society, it's how we generate and shape the institutional structures of the city as a key actor in that process. And this is old hat now, but the way we are innovating is changing. We're moving towards the old idea of Bell Labs, big research-intensive laboratories, to user innovation, social innovation, and most of the activity in cities is not manufacturing, it's services. And that has all implications for how the university works. And social innovations are a really important way of thinking about this. Innovations are social both in their ends and their means. They're new ideas, products, services, and models, new ways of working that simultaneously meet social needs more effectively than alternatives, and in the whole process create social relations or collaborations between the university and the society in that city. And this is all, it's changing because it creates a whole participants process by which people are coming together to learn together in projects to create benefits to everyone in tackling a social problem, which might be a housing problem, it might be the big issues of sustainability, it might be issues of migration, of inward migrants. These problems are big, big problems which need to be social innovations to overcome them. Technology is only a small part of it. And the university can be a player in that whole process. And citizens are incredibly important. This whole idea of open innovation, open science, and open in the world. Classic piece in the literature there, an invention. We tend to think about university to invent things, but an invention only becomes an innovation if users become part of the value creation process. And the whole role of citizens as in that process is critically, as it says here, distributed sources of knowledge. There's so much knowledge out there which we must not neglect in the university. And sometimes this is all brought together with this notion of the quadruple helix. I won't read all this quote out, but broadly speaking, there's a literature and a practice and a network of the triple helix: universities, business, and government. Working in cities, there's an international network, but there's an increasing interest in now what's called the quadruple helix. It's a network which brings not only universities, but business, government, and civil society together in a particular place. And that is a very important concept. It's moving on. You must involve citizens of your city as well as the big players in business and government if you're going to get this whole process working to the broader benefit. And critical to all of that, and again, I'm not going to read all this slide out, the digital world is changing all of that. Innovation in services, in service delivery, in the way we run our cities is increasingly involved changes in the way lots and lots of people act. Whether it's electric vehicles, moving around the city, public transport systems, we are in a very different world now where you cannot really consider innovation in place without thinking of the role of the digital technologies in all of that. And in Newcastle, we have a very interesting group of computer scientists who involved in what's called digital civics. And what they're trying to do is work with citizens and the general stuff that everyone's got on their phone, various apps which are being developed, but to do it in a way to help local government manage their delivery of services in a different way, to move away from a consumer producer model, transactional model, towards the notion of digital local government as a participatory platform through which citizens can take a more active role in shaping agendas, collaborating in service provision, and playing a more central role in creating sustainable and resilient cities, moving from a transactional model to a relational model. The key point about this, it's been the university working with both the local government and the health service to make this transformation possible. So you cannot neglect all of these recent changes. And this is not something which I found there's a lot of European literature on all of this, but the report that really most impressed me was one from 2016 called Europe's Mission to Innovate, And it's a critique of the notion that we in the university have the knowledge and tip it out over the wall and think that's it. The old, what's called the linear model. And Madeleine says in this review, focused on people, places and process. And I really like this last quote. And it's, if you don't remember anything else from this one, from this seminar, remember this quote. Our innovation economy is not a Roman aqueduct, but a muddy pond. It requires all actors, corporate, academic, civic and political. In other words, we must move away from the university as a sort of science push, which we develop the science, chuck it over the wall and hope that it's going to lead to innovation. It doesn't. Very rarely does it happen. So that's a reminder about that. And this implies that this isn't a straightforward issue. There are tensions in this whole university in the city agenda. And one of the books I was most it goes back a long way, by a guy called Thomas Bender, who wrote a book on the University of the City in 1988. And I think this captures some of the challenges we face in the economy. And I'll just read this whole quote. I propose that we understand the university as semi-cloistered heterogeneity, that's the university, in the midst of uncloistered heterogeneity, that is to say, the city. Because of this difference, relations between the two are necessarily tense, and they cannot be assimilated into one another. To do so either practically or conceptually is to empty each other of its distinctive cultural meaning and falsify the sociology of each. In other words, the university is distinctive, it is different from the city, and its way it is organised and managed is different. So we can't merge them. The city can't take over the university and the university can't take over the city. We have to recognise these differences and find ways of navigating through them by sorts of methods that I'm going to go on and talk about. And so there are inside-out tensions. So the university as an institution, it is the university, but it's also a set of academic subgroups. So the university, you will know this, those are from the university, is a very loosely coupled institution. It's not like a local government. I've just come from a seminar with a local government official who's now a vice rector of my university. And she told me, and it's going to be on a podcast soon, how different running local government is to running a university. And the other element in all of this is the physical nature of the university presence. Is the university premises helping open out the university to the city, or is it a barrier? Do we lock people out? Do we let the citizens in? Are our buildings open to the public? So physical sites are incredibly important in the way we manage those. There are also the problem that we face in the university world. Competition tends to be paramount. Universities, there are many cities, including notably Man, have several universities in them, and they compete with one another. And so how do you handle multiple institutions in one city? Many of the challenges that we face, like sustainability or age-friendly cities, are multidisciplinary. And yet most academics sit in disciplinary silos. You're an economist, you're an engineer, you're a humanities person, and these are really powerful silos within the university. But many of the problems that the city faces are cross-disciplinary. And then also, because of the problem of dealing with the links with the city, many cities and universities have created intermediate organisations, science parks, technology transfer offices, or off-campus theatres. So this whole notion of how you manage the interface and do these institutions help it or get in the way. I can tell you endless examples of science parks in countries which have become competitors with the university rather than facilitators. And the issue is whether all these communicators, all these communities collaborate or are they actively involved in working together and building trust-based relationships? And I really like this quote from someone very senior. He was in the Prime Minister's advisor under the Labour government. Local public agencies like councils often find the authority structure of universities opaque and diffuse. What is a rector? What is a vice rector? When you're used to a chief executive and vice chief executive. And this is a barrier. The autonomy of the faculty from the university administration is a virtue, i.e. the academics hate the administrators. And the tendency of the academics to view the hierarchy of their discipline as more important than the hierarchy of the university leadership. We don't care what the rector says to us, we'll do our own thing. And he or she doesn't have any authority. So it leaves the problem of the university as institution to mobilise and meet the shared challenges of pursuing overarching objectives. These are really quite tough institutional leadership problems, and I can talk at length about that. So we have various business models of the university out there. The Entrepreneurial University, a famous book by Burton Clark. The Entrepreneurial University with a strengthened steering core, an enhanced developmental periphery, all these intermediate organisations, a diversified funding base coming from all different sources, and a stimulated academic heartland. That's an ideal model. And then there's the triple helix, which I've just talked about. But all of these tend to have a strong focus on science and technology and business, and neglect the humanities and social sciences, place-based communities, and civil society. So that's where we come into this whole idea, which I'm now going to introduce to you, my idea and the idea that's taken root across the world of a civic university. And one of the ways I present the civic university is what is a traditional university, an uncivic, research-intensive university like Milan. You have research, which focuses on excellence. The teaching is on how satisfied the students are. This is a good university to study. And you have then what's sometimes called a third mission, and by definition is an inferior mission. And where the focus of management of the university, the leadership, we do third mission stuff because we want some money from business or from government. And it's all about getting extra money in. And there's a hard boundary between the university and the outside world. And you have lots of little dots here, lots of ad hoc activities, one-off events, which are all disconnected. And that leads to what we identified in the OECD report as a disconnected region. Higher education in the region, but not of it. Policies and practice is not encouraging engagement, focused on rewards for academic teaching and research. The public sector, a lack of coherence between national and regional policies, a lack of a political leadership, which is true in many cities, and a lack of shared voice and vision at the regional. What is the future of your city? Often it is not very clearly articulated by the politicians and the public authorities. You have the private sector, very fragmented, interested in narrow self-interest, dominated by a few big firms, as I know from some Italian cities, and with limited demand or absorptive capacity for innovation. And then critically, in all of this, a very important word, few people who are boundary spanners, connecting these different worlds together. An emphasis on supply side research, not on transactional rather than transformational information, and ineffective or non-existing partnerships, a lack of shared understanding about the challenges, and entrepreneurs and innovators locked out of the whole planning process for the city. So how can a civic university change all of that? Well, this is our model of a civic university, where you have all those little dots previously, external activities, all embedded in teaching and research. where research is designed to have social economic impact. Teaching is involved in getting students to participate in their community, to involve in voluntary work, where teaching enhances research, and where the focus of the university is on transformative and responsive demand-led innovations. So that is your classic civic university. And if that works, you get a very different model where all of these three circles overlap, where you get the university analysing, providing evidence and intelligence for the public sector, where you get the private sector building infrastructure for growth, where higher education provides skills and for the development of the private sector. So that is the ideal, and it's all based on evidence that support what we now call in Europe smart innovation and growth. I could go on at length about current policies, but that's where we want to be with a civic university. And the essence about this, which is challenging, is this is a normative model. This is what should happen, but it isn't necessarily what does happen. But ideally, the civic university is not only excellent in terms of conventional academic criteria, but it seeks to contribute to the public good. Responsibility to society is not new, but given greater saliency as we recognise the challenges that are confronting our society in our places. And so at the same time as being global, the civic university and responding to the global marketplace, universities have to compete, they have to attract international students and inward investment, but in terms of its own logic, it has to manage those and link the global and the local. And managing the tensions between the demands from a global higher education marketplace and research and staff aspirations with relationships with the city. And this is really, really very tough for the leadership of universities. And because there's contradictory signals coming from government, from local authorities, from citizens and public authorities. So this is a really tough agenda. And what we do in the book, we identify ideally 7 dimensions of the civic university. It's actively engaged. That word active is important. It takes a holistic approach to the place. It has a strong sense of place. It has a sense of purpose. What's it for? What are you good for, as well as what you're good at? It has to invest in doing this. In order to be a good civic university, the institution has to put money behind it. It has to be transparent and accountable to its stakeholders and the wider public, and to use innovative technologies and all the stuff about digital to build teams of people through action learning programs. And what we have developed in the book is a notion of all universities. We see ourselves on a journey. Many universities are not perfect civic universities. And so we've translated that in the appendix of the book into a self-assessment tool to see where you are on this journey. And you can use this. I mean, I've used it, and if you want to run it, here's an example of this. Just to what extent does the university in your place, where is it on that? Is the institution detached from the local environment with limited local linkages and a lack of integration within the physical fabric? Or is the location of the end of the diagram, the location of the institution integral to its identity? Is it viewed as an important asset by the local community? It physically blends within the local built environment, and it's seen as a living laboratory for research. That's the ideal civic university in relation to that particular dimension. And I got one quote from the book which I thought indicated how far Newcastle University was going down this agenda. It's a quote from a very senior academic we interviewed for the book, and without prompting, he said the following: "The notion of treating our city and its region as a seedbed for sustainability initiatives is a potent one. The vision is of academics out in the community working with local groups and businesses on practical initiatives to solve problems and promote sustainable development and growth. This necessitates that we proceed in a very open manner, seeking to overcome barriers to thought, to action and engagement. Barriers between researchers and citizens, between the urban and the rural, between the social and natural sciences, between teaching, research and enterprise. This guy has got it. And I wish more academics in my university get it in the way he's got it. So that's just one quote. And a key part of all this whole idea is another famous book by called University and the Leadership of Place. You're well aware of political leadership of cities and the managerial leadership of public authorities and hospitals, and you'll be aware of community leaderships from the community and voluntary sector. But what the university can provide in the place is intellectual leadership. Thinking about the future. How do we mobilize our brains across the academy to benefit the whole city? And one of the ways we've done this in Newcastle is to bring together virtually every discipline together to think about the future of the city in 2065. What are you, as an economist, as a civil engineer, as a medical scientist, as a scholar of English literature or of history, what do you bring to the table in thinking about the future of your city? And we did this over many years in what's called a foresight process. And universities and cities can identify assets and opportunities through dissemination of existing data and intelligence, by the provision of new data intelligence, by developed system thinking across fragmented governance and delivery bodies, promoting new network relationships between actors, and futures thinking is a very powerful device which universities and cities in Italy need to start thinking about. In the UK, we took this all forward by the idea, basically starting off what we do in Newcastle, in looking at a national civic university commission. How did we develop this as a movement across all universities and cities in the UK? And we had a roving commission. We went around from city to city and produced this report called Truly Civic, Strengthen the Connection Between Universities and Their Places. And it's you can download it. And what we found when we went around and visited various cities was the following: a lack of local accountability in many English cities. Universities were in the city, but not of it. There was an ignorance of local people about the contribution universities make to their community, especially, this is very important, amongst the less advantaged, the poorer people. We have a system of fees, and where people saw the fees that their kids were paying was for private benefit and not for public good. So that's a real problem in the UK. We saw lots of bottom-up activity by academics doing work with their communities, but really not short-term project funding. Not really. Academics from different disciplines would dive in, do a bit of work and go away. And the funding, we got a grant to do something, we did it and then we left. And there was no long-term sustained trust-based relationships. And the way in which government funding came down, you had money for different parts, for health, for culture, money for transport, all of these silos. And university got into all of these silos, but it wasn't joined up at all in the UK state, which is highly centralised. So what we proposed, and this really has taken off, is that universities should produce civic university agreements to develop a joint strategy co-created with other partners, understanding local populations and asking them what they wanted, looking inside, understanding themselves, working with other local anchor institutions to agree where the short, medium and long-term opportunities were, This is where your future stuff comes in. A clear set of priorities. What was most important now? How did you move to a future desired outcome? And the output of this is a strategic analysis for local engagements and prioritization, a clear action plan, including how do you fund it. So those now, there was a 53 universities signed up. There's now over 100 who have done these civic university agreements in the UK. And the central thing and the message of all of this is it's difficult. Anchoring isn't straightforward. We want to float away like this balloon, and there are all sorts of obstacles, lack of local demand from students, a lack of demand from small businesses, recruitment of students from wherever you can get them rather than necessarily locally, national driven science innovation priorities, and not much in the UK regional funding because we're a highly centralised country. But against all that, and I'm going to close now and just bring you up to date with what we're doing in the UK, which might be of some relevance to Italy. We have now, after the Civic University Network, we established a hub, which was bringing up all of these Civic Universities agreements. And we've now established, and I'm in effect the academic leader, of a national civic impact accelerator program aimed at increasing the connectivity and effectiveness of the higher education sector's civic activity for local, societal, economic and environmental benefit, and do as much as possible by creating a learning system. How do we learn within cities and between cities? So if in a particular city there's several universities, how do we learn? How do we learn from other cities in a national network? And so how we're going to achieve that, and there's a lot of knowledge out there. One of the most interesting things is how much knowledge. There's a huge academic literature. There's a huge policy literature, which I am familiar with and others are familiar with, and we need to mine that. And we need to then develop the leadership potential within universities and outside to use that in practical actions in their own cities. And finding new ways of doing that, scaling it up and spreading it out across the higher education and city system. And we're looking at 7 domains of civic impact: social impact, environment, climate and biodiversity, health and well-being, cultural, economic impact, the built environment and placemaking, and institutional strategy and leadership. And there's a whole, and finally, this is my last slide, trying to set this in an international context. And there's a really very interesting OECD program called ECOL, which is helping evaluate the whole program. And we are trying to make sure that what we're doing. And so I'm delighted to be with you in Milan and Italy, in hoping at some stage we can bring some Italian universities and cities into our global network. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John, for this very, very rich presentation. We learned several analytical categories with which to understand our world, and also many concrete experiences from the UK and possible lessons also for our country. I think that now we can start collecting questions.
Should I stop sharing my screen? It might be a good idea. Should I stop that?
Yes, unless someone wants to get back to any of your slides, but I think that you can stop.
Okay, just a second. Yeah. I'm not sure how to do that. I stop sharing them. Okay, I'm not sure how to do it. Hang on, someone tell me how to do it.
Otherwise, well, never mind. We can also.
Okay. Sorry, I can't do it.
Fine. Okay, so is anybody willing to ask a question? Let's collect a few questions, and then we'll give John a chance to answer. Matteo?
Yes, thank you, Professor Goddard. I think that was a very interesting presentation. I have two questions because you have talked about tensions in cities, and in Italy there is currently much discussion about tension, about the attractiveness of large university cities that created among the student population. I want to ask you how can cities and universities address the challenge of being economically, culturally, and socially attractive, while in the other hand ensuring that no one is somehow excluded. And in your book, you explore the complex interaction between universities and the cities in which they are located. However, with the evolution of digital technologies and form of distance education, how do you believe the role of university within cities is changing, and what implication might emerge for local economic development?
Okay.
Vito?
Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. In the slide that you had presented, you say that the positive impact of the academic area, academic world on the local territory also depends on the ability of a local actor. This seems to me a fundamental point. The reflection are different, are three. A first reflection is related to the university, online universities. It is a term that we are studying now. Compared to this term, I wonder how the reasoning that you presenting today will develop. Another consideration concern disciplinary area. Each university has a different specialization. I expect that the impact, at least the economic one, is greater in the territories where there are scientific degree courses. Obviously, the impact on the establishment of a civic consciousness or civicness develop more where there are more humanities courses. The last reflection, the last consideration is linked to the suburbs. How it's possible to prevent that the impact from arresting to the city alone, it is possible to activate a process that has a positive impact on entire region. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's collect a couple more questions and then you can have a chance. So, Stefano?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for the presentation. I had just a small question about the issue of competitiveness between universities. So that the competition that we all know is a part of a sane education market. If there is a competition, and if the national authorities enhance this competition by, for example, awarding funds through premium procedures and something like that, do you think that this could go to have a detrimental impact on the ability of a university to be useful to the territory that it sits in, and on the other side, it risks to create a league of excellent universities with excellent territories, and all the not performing universities and territories get left behind?
Okay. I think that's a lot of questions. Shall I respond?
Right.
Okay. I'll try and summarize.
Okay, go ahead if you.
Can you hear me? You can hear me, okay. Okay, the first one was about, and there's a lot of interconnection with them, about large cities and large, top universities in big cities, basically. And that's a perennial problem. By and large, in many countries, the top universities are in the biggest cities. And usually, they're the economic heartlands of their countries, like Milan or London. And this is a real problem. And by and large, that's the last point about the competitiveness. The funding for research tends to go to the best researchers in the best universities, and it reinforces what sometimes in biblical terms called the Matthew principle. To him that hath, more will be given, from the gospel. So the issue is the extent to which that becomes part of a public discourse. And it's not just a discourse within a city, it's a national discourse. It's what governments want to do. And in the UK, we are even very centralised country. And there is a big debate going on about devolution, about what's called levelling up between different parts of the country, and levelling up and reducing inequalities within cities. And there is now a recognition in many spheres that universities can make a role there. So in England, the research councils that fund research in different disciplinary areas, in engineering, humanities, medicine, they now all have a strand of work about place. So place is now being put in there, and they're putting money in to building capacity to develop absorptive capacity to absorb research outputs in local communities. So we have a series of programs about developing innovation potential on the part of the people you're trying to get the research to. So you have to invest in the development of the demand side, not just only in the supply side. And that's tricky, but it can be done. And there's a lot of evidence of things that are going on now in the European Union, the various programs, which I could give you another lecture on, about how to do this stuff. PRI's initiative. So there are things that you can do. Now, and so that was in a sense, and that's the first and large question. The next question was about digital education and how, in a sense, does place matter now because of digitalization and programs. I can say that, again, from the experience in the UK, we put a lot of effort into all of that, online programs, and broadly speaking, it has failed. It still is very much, students want the opportunity of face-to-face contact with their tutors. They can use online techniques and technologies in their pedagogy, but it's still, and in a way, the pandemic was quite interesting. We haven't really talked about the impact of the pandemic, but lots of new ways of working emerged. And what we're getting is a new, more stable pattern between working at home, coming into the university. And the other thing, in many subjects, you have to be in the laboratory. So this whole notion of having laboratories, and even in the humanities, it is increasingly important, to understand how to do the creative arts. That is a physical, creative thing. Painting, drama, all the rest of it. And the whole notion of working with citizens in lifelong learning. There's a limit to what I've talked about digital technology. It's important. But if we move into a world, the whole digital thing, it does not mean that universities and place are no longer important. The next question was about stability of local actors, if I've got it right. That's a very good point. One of the problems we face is churn in people in municipalities, and also churn in the leadership of universities. You know, rectors change, political leaders change. So the issue is, how do you build a stable infrastructure of people who know each other at all levels, not just at the top of organizations, but all down the hierarchy? People in universities, in professional services, who talk to the town planners, you know, who are responsible for the planning of the city, and it might be the university professional estates people. So we need to build some stability in by having lots and lots of relationships at all sorts of levels, not just at the top level. And so that's, but then another question was about specialization. I mean, different universities in a particular city might have a profile which is some of them which doesn't seem relevant to the whole city, to the economic and social development needs of the city. The trick is in developing the idea of the university as the city having a higher education system, whereby all the different players come together and work together. So in my region of northeast of England, we now have a network of all the universities in the region who meet together. They collaborate rather than compete. There might be still some competition in research grants, but nevertheless, you have a forum where people can say, well, look, we're best at doing that, they're best at doing the other. So, and how do you then have some sort of hub which actually articulates that? So in the northeast of England, we have a thing called Insights Northeast, which is saying in a particular challenge, University X or Professor Y is the best person, and signposting it so that you can create a collaborative networks. So there's all sorts of tricks and design questions that you can do in that space. And in many issues, it will involve bringing different specializations together. I mean, you know, smart specialization is not just about economic competitiveness, it's about how you take the different skills. And if you take some of these big, grand challenges of sustainable development, you need the humanities and you need the sciences and the social sciences. It is a grand challenge where you need to find ways of bringing together the different specialisms. So there is a way of doing it, and I've just recorded a podcast about this in the UK from someone who now leads the place agenda in my university, who was previously chief executive of the local authority. And if you keep in contact with me, there's lots of stuff out there. It's UK specific, but it's transferable. I've just done a big project in Andalusia in Spain, which is going to be rolled out by the European universities and alliances. So there are all sorts of tricks of the trade that are going on currently in policy terms, which I haven't lectured you about. But somehow, if you're going to use this platform of getting together, you almost need another session with me about the current policy environment. Okay, I haven't answered all the questions, but I've done my best. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Well, I like to raise one question while waiting for others to come in. And it has to do with the fact that your presentation has been, as I said before, very rich, very interesting. I agree with a large part of that. I only found your dealing with the issue of differences between the universities as a bit normatively guided, so to speak, a bit biased, if you wish. Of course, universities are all locally embedded institutions, but some of them are with a predominantly international scope, hence playing, so to speak, in a supra-local and also supranational playing field. We all know that. You already dealt with this problem a bit in answering, in your first answer to the previous questions. However, I'm not sure that you take full account of this type of differences, or whether the way you treat it is totally the way I would. I just make an example, not to make to make a long point. For instance, you at a certain point in your slides wrote civic university tries to contribute to public good. Like if other types of universities didn't contribute to public good, like if not contributing to local development or local culture and so on were something not related to public good. If you think of the typical large metropolitan university where there is a lot of research on developing vaccines, for instance. Of course, to develop vaccine is to contribute to an extremely important public good, which is not cannot be measured locally. It's not a contribution to the local environment. It's a contribution to humanity, so to speak. And yet it is a different type of contribution to the public good. So I wonder whether one shouldn't start from the consideration that there are different types of universities which have different missions, or that focus on different missions, and the civic university is an extremely important and so far underdeveloped type of university, and the mission they serve is one that should be helped to develop, but it's by no means the only way of contributing to the public good. I will stop here.
Okay, very good point, and this, I mean, the notion of, let me start again. In the UK and in Italy, there are big universities in big cities. Many of them were originally established with strong local roots, and then we had globalization and all the rest of it. I think the issue is some of the big research-intensive universities in big cities, the world-leading universities in each of their countries, can be doing a range of things. They can be doing, as you say, discovering vaccines, doing leading-edge science, which does, no doubt, contribute to the public good. But other parts of those universities can, and that's a different definition of public good. I define public good as the well-being of the place in which the university is located. And it can be, and that certainly is the case, that big, highly rated, research-intensive universities are contributing to science and in the broadest sense of the word, but at the same time, parts of those universities are also contributing to my definition of the public good. In other words, if you think about the whole portfolio of universities, you will have, and in the academy, you will have academics who buy into that. I don't want anything to do with, I'm a theoretical physicist. It's highly not relevant to me in what I'm doing. I think that the trick is in big universities to get a balanced portfolio. You cannot ignore in a big university, in a big city, you do have an impact. And do you want to make that impact as possible, as positive as possible to maximize it? It's not saying everyone in that university and the whole university should be doing it. So the mission statement of my university in Newcastle is to do both. You know, it's to be a world-class university contributing to the well-being of global well-being and the place. So I do think the mission of the institution many universities are now waking up to the fact that they have to have some public accountability. And they have a public accountability to the state, as far as the state's funding it. But in our countries, most Western democracies, accountability is through electoral systems, which are place-based. We have members of parliament, we have leaders of municipalities. So we cannot ignore, as it were, the citizens of the place. And so even the universities are doing these fantastic goods. And I think vaccines was a good example. What was extremely interesting was in the pandemic, a lot of the work that was done by universities was not only doing the discovery work about, but actually seeing how to roll out vaccination to the community, to get people from different backgrounds to do it, how to get the health service, how to get a whole range of different actors, making sure that an innovation like a vaccine was rolled out and taken up by every part of the society, how to help schools which were closed down with doing education. So we by and large, all universities everywhere during the big challenge of the pandemic stepped up to the plate in new ways. So I wouldn't like to pose it as either or. I mean, in a way, you pose the question as a bit either or. I'm saying it's a bit of both, and how you, not all universities, and it is true that some universities in some places, their sole raison d'etre is to be civic. I have an honorary doctorate from a university in the border of Belgium, which has developed itself solely as a civic university based on my work. And that's a very special case because it's a small university in a border region, and that's at the heart of its activity. So I think my answer to your question is it's not black and white, it's nuanced, and how you go about it depends on the leadership of the university and its vision and mission.
Okay, thanks. Other questions?
That was a good question, and I'm not sure I really answered it. But anyway,
no. It's your question was your answer was very interesting. Of course, we could go a long way discussing that, but because one answer is your answer. Each university should, in a sense, try a balance between the two and do both. Another possible another possible answer could be every university should specialize in predominantly serving one mission or predominantly serving other missions, because of course universities are not like cities are not equal, because of course London is not like Newcastle, or Milan is not like Modena. But also universities are not the same in terms of size, in terms of international connections and so on. And therefore, for the public good, is it better that every city and every university tries to do everything, or it may be better for the public good that every actor tries to specialize in what it can do best? That's an open question to me. I don't have an answer, but it's just.
Sorry, it is. As I would go, just come back to you. It is a public policy question. I mean, and part of the problem is, broadly speaking, universities. It's different in countries with devolved systems. There's a lot I could go on about the US and what's gone in individual states, but to a degree, it certainly in my country, what is taught where has evolved historically without any sense of planning, and we've got what we've got. I mean, in the UK, the classic example is Cambridge, which is the oldest Oxford and Cambridge, old universities, and they want to be seen to be doing more politically to their society, but the society in Cambridge doesn't want it because it doesn't want any more development, because it's an overdeveloped region. So how you juggle between different demands, demands of being excellent, you recognize you have a public responsibility. So what needs to happen in most countries, and this is why the OECD work's important, you do need to have a discourse about, how you shape the territorial development of the system going forward, and particularly in relation to where students study and what they study. I don't believe, frankly, it needs some, you just can't leave it to the marketplace. You need some form of steering and regulation, but how you do it while maintaining creativity and innovation is a very tough question. We could go on at length, and I'd like to talk to you privately about it. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thanks to you. It was extremely interesting, and thanks for you started our series. I hope that all seminars will be as interesting and challenging as this one. Thanks.
Okay. Well, good luck with your series, and I hope we can stay in contact. All right.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.